Morning sunlight sliced through the mist over Riverside City Courthouse, catching on the glass and concrete like shards of gold. It was a day like any other, or at least that's what everyone thought. Inside, the halls buzzed with clerks, lawyers, and officers, all moving to the rhythm of bureaucracy. But at precisely 8:37 a.m., that rhythm shattered. Judge Darius Cole, a man of quiet composure and commanding presence, stepped out of his car in a crisp gray suit. He was known throughout Riverside for his calm rulings, his fairness, and the way he always greeted the janitors by name. A black man in his mid-40s, Darius had spent his career turning the law into something human, something that could protect, not just punish. He carried his briefcase, walking toward the courthouse steps, when a voice barked from behind. "Hey, you! Step away from the car." Darius turned, confused. A young white officer in tactical gear, Officer Travis Kane, was striding toward him, hand on his gun. Behind him, two more officers flanked his sides. Darius blinked. "Excuse me? Don't move," Kane snapped. "We got a report of a stolen vehicle. Hands where I can see 'em." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Officer, that's my car." "You're mistaken." "Oh, I bet I am," Kane sneered. "License and registration now?" The tension thickened. Passers-by slowed, phones discreetly rising. Darius's voice stayed level. "My identification is in my inside pocket. May I reach for it?" "No sudden moves." Kane barked. He lunged forward, grabbed Darius's wrist, and slammed him against the hood of the car. The impact echoed down the courthouse steps. The crowd gasped. Darius's briefcase tumbled to the ground, its contents scattering across the pavement. Legal documents, a leather notepad, and a golden judge's pin glinting in the sun. "You have no right," Darius began, but Kane twisted his arm harder. "You don't tell me about rights," Kane growled. "You people are all the same." That phrase, "you people," landed like a spark in dry brush. The onlookers murmured, some filming, others frozen. Within seconds, Kane cuffed him. "You're under arrest for resisting and interfering with police procedure." The absurdity hung in the air. Darius Cole, the presiding federal judge for Riverside County, was being handcuffed on his own courthouse steps by a man who didn't even recognize him. As Kane dragged him toward the squad car, Darius caught sight of his dropped judge's ID still fluttering on the pavement. "Officer," he said, voice quiet but razor-sharp, "look at my identification. Save it for your public defender." Kane spat. The doors slammed. The siren wailed. And with it, the morning's peace was gone. The booking station at Riverside Precinct was chaos. Kane tossed Darius's file onto the desk of Sergeant Bell, who glanced at it and froze. "What the hell did you just do?" Bell hissed. "Picked up a suspect outside the courthouse," Kane said casually, removing his gloves. "Guy was acting suspicious around a vehicle." Bell's eyes widened as he read the name. "You idiot. That's Judge Darius Cole." Kane laughed until he saw Bell wasn't joking. His smirk collapsed. "You mean the federal judge? The only black federal judge in this state." Bell snapped. "Jesus, Kane. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Within an hour, the precinct was flooded. Lawyers, reporters, federal marshals. The mayor's office called. The U.S. Attorney's office called. And in the holding cell, Judge Cole sat silently, his wrists bruised, his dignity intact. When Sergeant Bell approached with trembling hands to unlock the door, Darius didn't say a word. He simply looked at Kane, the same officer who had thrown him against his own car, and said, "You've made a grave mistake. But the difference between you and me, Officer Kane, is that I still believe in due process." The room went still. Kane tried to laugh it off. muttering something about mistaken identity. But the cameras were already rolling. A bystander's video had gone viral, 10 million views by evening. The world had watched a white officer brutalize a black judge outside his own courthouse. The system's hypocrisy had just been caught on tape. And Darius Cole, the man who had spent his life upholding the law, had just become its latest victim. By nightfall, Riverside was astorm. News vans crowded the courthouse steps. Protesters gathered with signs. Justice for Judge Cole. If it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. Darius, released under federal protection, refused interviews. He sat at his desk, replaying the scene in his mind, the echo of that phrase, "you people," still ringing in his ears. He wasn't angry for himself. He was angry because it proved everything his community had been saying for years. That power without accountability is just violence wearing a uniform. He looked at the sealed summons in front of him, State of Riverside versus Officer Travis Kane, and said quietly, "The next morning, Riverside City Courthouse felt different. The air itself seemed charged, as if justice were holding its breath. A throng of reporters crowded the steps, their cameras pointed at the double doors like a firing squad. Inside, the hallways buzzed with whispers. Is it true he arrested a federal judge? In broad daylight? They say there's body cam footage. Every conversation stopped when Judge Darius Cole entered the courtroom. He wore the same calm expression that had carried him through decades of trials. But this time, his black robe felt heavier, like armor forged from the ashes of humiliation. He wasn't presiding today. The Chief Justice had insisted another judge oversee the pretrial hearing against Officer Kane. But as the victim and a sitting federal judge, Darius was invited to testify, and everyone in that room knew this wasn't going to be a normal hearing. At the defendant's table sat Officer Travis Kane, flanked by his attorney, Richard Lowell, a man who'd built his career defending police misconduct cases with one word: procedure. Kane's jaw was tight, his uniform freshly pressed, his eyes darting between his lawyer and the cameras. Gone was the swagger from the day before. When Darius took the stand, the room fell silent. The clerk raised her hand. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Darius said softly. His voice carried across the chamber like the first note of a hymn. Lowell stood, his tone polite but edged. "Judge Cole, I understand this must have been a distressing misunderstanding." Officer Kane believed he was responding to a vehicle theft. "A misunderstanding?" Darius's voice sharpened slightly. "Officer Kane threw me against my own car, called me a criminal, and handcuffed me in front of my courthouse. That's not misunderstanding, counselor. That's misconduct." A murmur swept through the gallery. Lowell tried to pivot. "But, Your Honor, my client didn't know your identity." "He didn't need to," Darius interrupted. "The Constitution protects all citizens, not just those with titles." That single sentence struck the courtroom like a bell. Chief Judge Langston, presiding today, nodded slowly. "Proceed, Judge Cole." A screen descended behind the bench. The prosecutor, Elena Brooks, queued up the body cam footage. "Your Honor," she said, "we present Exhibit A, Officer Kane's body camera from the morning of October 12th. The screen flickered. The video played. There it was, the moment Kane approached Darius, the aggressive tone, the shove, the slur. Gasps rippled through the audience as the words, "You people are all the same," echoed through the speakers. Kane shifted in his seat. His lawyer whispered frantically, but Kane's face was already drained of color. Elena paused the video. "Officer Kane, is that your voice?" Kane hesitated. It could be distorted." "Distorted," Darius repeated, turning his gaze toward him. Officer, the only thing distorted that morning was your perception of who I was. The courtroom broke into low murmurs. Judge Langston banged the gavel for order, but even she couldn't suppress the tremor in her voice when she said, "Continue, Judge Cole." Darius opened a folder, a thick one, filled with paper tabs and highlighted reports. "What we witnessed that morning was not an isolated mistake," he began. "It was the product of a culture that rewards aggression and punishes accountability." He lifted the first document. Internal Affairs Complaint Number 2741. Filed by Mrs. Teresa Wynne, 62. Alleged verbal and physical abuse during a traffic stop. Marked unsubstantiated. He placed it down. Complaint Number 2819. Marcus Hill, age 17. Excessive force during questioning. Unsubstantiated. He kept going, each complaint like a nail in a coffin. 37 complaints in total, Your Honor. Not one resulted in discipline. Lowell objected. Irrelevant to the present charge. Judge Langston raised an eyebrow. Overruled. The court will hear it. Darius continued, his tone steady, almost surgical. The department's pattern of silence enabled this. Officer Kane didn't fear consequences because there never were any. He wasn't acting alone. He was acting in the image the system shaped for him. His words hit harder than any accusation. Reporters scribbled furiously. The gallery leaned forward. Even some of the officers in uniform looked uneasy. Kane's composure cracked. Sweat formed at his temples. He whispered to his lawyer, "I didn't know he was a judge. I swear." Darius turned his gaze to him. "That's the tragedy, officer. You didn't care who I was. You just saw color, and you saw threat." He leaned slightly forward. "You thought you were above accountability. But what you didn't realize is that accountability was already waiting. In this very courtroom." The audience stirred again. Judge Langston didn't stop it this time. She just watched. Elena Brooks stepped up, voice firm. "Your Honor, based on the evidence, we request Officer Kane be charged with assault under color of law, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. Furthermore, we request a full review of his service record and the conduct of his superiors." Kane's lawyer stood, shouting objections that drowned in the rising noise of the room. Judge Langston lifted her gavel but didn't strike it yet. Instead, she said, "Officer Kane, do you have anything to say before I make my ruling?" Kane looked at Darius, for the first time really looked at him. His lips trembled. "I made a mistake." Darius tilted his head. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice." And with that, silence fell. Judge Langston finally brought the gavel down. "The court hereby suspends Officer Kane without pay pending a full federal investigation. Bail is denied." The gavel echoed through the room. One sharp, thunderous crack of finality. Reporters surged toward the aisles. Cameras flashed. Darius stood slowly. His voice was calm but carried the gravity of truth. "Justice isn't blind," he said softly. "She's just been forced to close her eyes for too long." The crowd erupted in applause. Outside, the courthouse steps filled with chants. "No one is above the law. Justice for all." Darius stood at the top, looking out over the sea of people, ordinary citizens who had seen the system falter but, for once, were watching it make things right. For the first time in his career, Judge Darius Cole realized that justice wasn't something you preside over. It was something you fight for. The night after the hearing, Judge Darius Cole sat alone in his study overlooking the riverfront district. The city lights shimmered against the water, but all he saw in the glass reflection was his own face, bruised, steady, and changed. He hadn't slept since the arrest. Every replay of the morning looped in his head. The slap, the laughter of the officers, the cold metal of handcuffs against his wrists. But the moment that haunted him most wasn't the violence. It was the silence that followed it, the silence of onlookers who saw everything and said nothing. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Judge Cole," said a voice that was too calm. "This is Director Shaw from the Department of Justice. We're opening a federal inquiry. We'll need your full cooperation and your discretion." "Discretion?" Darius echoed. "Director, I was assaulted on the steps of my own courthouse. The public has a right to know what kind of rot has been festering beneath that badge." Shaw hesitated. "You're not wrong, but we're talking about deep institutional ties here, city officials, police unions, even the mayor's office. This could get complicated." Darius leaned back, the exhaustion sharpening into resolve. "Then let's make it complicated," he said. "It's about time someone did." The next morning, every major network carried the story. Headline: Officer arrested after assaulting federal judge. Calls for police reform intensify. In the footage looping across the nation, the image of Darius, blood on his cheek, cuffed, eyes blazing, had already become a symbol. Cable anchors debated his case. Protesters filled city squares. But behind closed doors, the backlash was swift. Inside the Riverside Police Headquarters, Commissioner Glenn Weaver paced his office, red-faced and sweating. "Do you realize what this looks like?" he barked at his deputy. "Our own officer assaults a federal judge, and now Washington's breathing down my neck." His deputy shrugged. "Kane's been a loose cannon for years, sir. We all knew it." Weaver glared. "Then why didn't you stop him?" The deputy's silence was answer enough. By the third day, the hate mail started. Anonymous letters slid under Darius's courthouse door. One read, "You made an example of a good cop. Now we'll make an example of you." He handed the letters to U.S. Marshals, who insisted on providing protection, but Darius refused to hide. "If I start hiding," he told his clerk, "then the bullies win again." Still, when he drove home that night, a black SUV followed him for 6 blocks before turning off. His gut told him this wasn't over, not by a long shot. In Washington, D.C., Director Shaw assembled a task force, the Civil Accountability Division, a special investigative body designed to root out corruption within law enforcement agencies. Their lead investigator was Special Agent Naomi Vance, a sharp, methodical woman with a background in forensic auditing. She arrived in Riverside 2 days later, carrying a thick folder labeled Operation Truth Shield. When she met Darius in his office, her tone was brisk. "Judge Cole, we're reopening every case Officer Kane ever touched. That's 1,172 in total." Darius blinked. "That many?" Naomi nodded. "And that's just his record. We also have evidence suggesting his sergeant, Paul Hendricks, covered up at least 15 internal affairs complaints." She slid over a file. Inside were photographs, timelines, and copies of falsified reports. "This goes higher than anyone wants to admit," Naomi said. "We believe several city officials took bribes to bury misconduct cases." Darius stared at the evidence, a bitter laugh escaping him. "So this isn't just about one man. It's the entire machine." "Exactly," Naomi said. "And now that machine is panicking." Riverside erupted. Protests outside the courthouse swelled into thousands. Crowds carried signs reading "Justice has no color" and "Cole for truth." The police union retaliated with its own press conference. "Officer Kane is being made a scapegoat," their spokesperson declared. "Judge Cole is politicizing the justice system. This is a witch hunt." That phrase, witch hunt, spread fast. Talk radio hosts picked it up. Anonymous accounts flooded social media. posting doctored photos and conspiracy theories claiming Darius had staged his own assault. In one news segment, an anchor asked, "Could this judge be exaggerating events for political gain?" Darius watched the coverage in silence. His clerk, Amira, slammed the remote on his desk. "They're turning it around on you," she said angrily. "They're trying to make you the criminal." Darius smiled faintly. "Of course they are. That's what happens when power feels cornered." 2 weeks later, an anonymous USB drive arrived at Naomi Vance's desk. No note, no return address. When she opened it, her eyes widened. "Oh my God!" The footage showed Kane and two other officers, Beckett and O'Rourke, laughing in the locker room. "You see that guy's face when I cuffed him?" Kane sneered. "Didn't even know who he was. Thought he was another thug trying to get smart." "Oh, guess he found out the hard way." Beckett smirked. "Bet the department still covers it." "They always do." Then came the kicker, Beckett holding up a wad of cash. "Here's the bonus from Hendricks for last week's confiscation. Easiest money I ever made." Naomi froze the frame. Bribes, payoffs, proof of systemic abuse. She immediately called Darius. "Judge Cole, we've got them. This isn't just misconduct. It's organized corruption." That night, Naomi's car was broken into. Her laptop, containing preliminary findings, was stolen. 2 officers from the Riverside precinct claimed they'd found it abandoned in a nearby alley, but when they returned it, the hard drive was wiped clean. "They're scared," Naomi said grimly. "That means we're close." The next morning, the city's mayor, Richard Purnell, held a press conference. "I urge calm," he said smoothly. "This city will not be divided by anger. We will conduct an internal review and ensure fairness for all involved." Darius watched the speech and shook his head. "He's stalling," he told Naomi. "He's giving the department time to destroy evidence." Naomi looked up from her notes. "Then we move faster." 3 days later, Naomi discovered something explosive: bank transfers from the police union's account to several city council members, labeled as community safety grants. The total, $2.1 million. But the money trail didn't end there. One transfer led directly to Commissioner Weaver's personal account. Naomi brought the findings to Darius. He scanned the documents, his expression darkening. "They were buying silence," he said. "Buying power." Naomi nodded. "And now they're going to lose it." The DOJ task force, with Darius's testimony, filed 47 federal indictments, including against Weaver, Hendricks, and 3 city officials. The arrests made national headlines. Riverside scandal: federal judge's assault uncovers massive police corruption network. The people who once doubted Darius now called him a hero. But Darius didn't celebrate. He knew justice was never simple, and corruption had deep roots. Late that night, Naomi approached him outside the courthouse. "You realize what you've done?" she asked. "What's that?" "You didn't just expose one bad cop. You set the entire justice system on fire." Darius smiled faintly, looking up at the courthouse lights. "Then maybe it's time we see what rises from the ashes." The courthouse in downtown Briston had never been this quiet. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed subdued, almost respectful, as Judge Carter Reynolds stepped out of the chamber after delivering his historic verdict. The weight of the gavel still lingered in his hand, a reminder that this morning, he hadn't just presided over a courtroom. He had changed the course of countless lives. Outside, the city's morning bustle continued as if nothing had happened, unaware that inside the grand marble halls, an unrepentant officer's career had been annihilated in real time. Carter's thoughts wandered back to Officer Lane Thornton, the man who had assaulted him. His face, pale and shaking, The way he had faltered under the weight of undeniable evidence would be etched in Carter's memory forever. But there was no time to dwell. Justice was never static, and there were consequences yet to administer. The first call came from District Attorney Simone Hale, her voice tense but reverent. "Carter, the press is here. Cameras. Interviews. They're calling it the Briston turning point. What do you want me to do?" Carter ran a hand over his face, the bruise from the struggle still faintly visible from his earlier confrontation. "Simone, make sure the victims are protected. No sensationalism. Let the truth speak. And double-check the security footage. We need copies for every investigation into Thornton's past cases." Minutes later, the first wave of media arrived. They pushed and shoved, lenses flashing, microphones thrust forward. Carter ignored them, moving with the same calm, authoritative stride that had defined him for decades. He wasn't here for applause. He was here to ensure that the aftermath of justice was as complete as its delivery. Meanwhile, back inside the courthouse, Thornton was being escorted by federal agents. His uniform was gone, replaced by the stark orange of pretrial detention. For the first time in his life, he realized that power wasn't something you could wield indefinitely without accountability. His attorney, Derek Lowell, muttered reassurances that fell on deaf ears. Thornton's mind was spiraling, trapped in the same panic he had inflicted on others for years. And then came the first ripple. A former defendant, Malik Jefferson, who had spent 6 months in county jail due to Thornton's falsified testimony, appeared in the gallery. His eyes glistened with tears as he approached the judge's chambers, gratitude and awe etched into his face. Carter nodded at him silently. Words weren't necessary. This was justice not just spoken but felt. But the morning was far from over. Carter's clerk, Elena Rhodes, arrived with an urgent message. "Your Honor, there's a tip coming in. Someone inside the department is already trying to delete case files linked to Thornton. We may have a full-blown cover-up attempt in motion." Carter's jaw tightened. "Then we move faster. Call IT. Lock every file. Notify federal oversight. No one touches a thing without my direct authorization." And so the cascade began. Thornton's assault had not just shattered his own career, it had ignited a domino effect that exposed the rot throughout Briston's police department. As Carter's office coordinated the first of many investigations, the city began to wake up to a reality it had long ignored. Power unchallenged breeds corruption, and silence is complicity. Across the street, the media vans continued to arrive, each station hungry for the footage of a gavel slamming down on a police officer's career. Carter did not flinch. He knew the images and the testimony would travel farther than any speech ever could. But he also knew that truth, once released, has a life of its own. It sparks conversations, forces accountability, and sometimes it inspires courage. The first twist came unexpectedly. Carter received an anonymous email, marked urgent. The message contained a single line. "Thornton was not acting alone this morning. There are others watching, others who know your weaknesses." Carter read the line twice. His instincts, honed from decades of prosecuting corruption, told him immediately that this was more than a warning. It was a challenge. He knew the city's underbelly, the whispers in precincts, the closed-door deals. Now those whispers were moving into daylight, and he had to be ready. He placed the tablet down, straightened his robes, and looked out the window at the rising sun over Briston. For the first time, he felt the heavy truth of his responsibility settle over him. Justice wasn't a single verdict. It was a continuing fight, and the morning's events were only the beginning. By midday, the courthouse had transformed into a nerve center of tension, authority, and meticulous planning. Carter Reynolds returned to his chambers, robes flowing, gavel in hand, eyes sharper than ever. He had always known that delivering justice was only the first step. Ensuring accountability across a corrupted system required stamina, precision, and relentless focus. Elena Rhodes, his trusted clerk, handed him a secure tablet with multiple encrypted feeds. "Your Honor, we've secured the entire department's database. Every officer's case history, every complaint, every internal review. It's all frozen. No deletions can happen without federal oversight." Carter nodded slowly. "Good. We can't afford a single compromised file. If Thornton's actions have triggered this level of exposure, we need to ensure nothing is lost. I want this investigation airtight, unassailable." Simultaneously, the first victims of Thornton's misconduct began contacting the courthouse. Some were elderly, some were young, all of them terrified that speaking out might bring retaliation. One by one, Carter met with them in secure offices, listening to their stories, taking meticulous notes. His calm demeanor contrasted with the raw emotion of those sitting across from him, the weight of years of injustice finally finding a voice. Among them was Clarence Mendez, a former high school coach who had been falsely arrested and publicly humiliated due to Thornton's fabricated evidence. "Judge, I didn't think anyone would ever care," Mendez said, voice trembling. I thought it would just eat me alive." Carter leaned forward, eyes steady. "Clarence, today proves the system can work, but only when someone refuses to look away. Your story, and the stories of everyone Thornton harmed, will be heard, and you will finally see the consequences for those who abused their power." Meanwhile, the federal investigation into Thornton's department began to uncover a network of systemic bias that extended far beyond a single rogue officer. Deputy Chief Evelyn Sharp, a white woman who had quietly worked under the radar for years, became the first high-ranking official implicated in cover-ups. Documents surfaced showing her involvement in suppressing complaints, manipulating evidence, and encouraging officers to follow unofficial quotas that disproportionately targeted communities of color. Carter studied the evidence, a storm of betrayal simmering behind his eyes. So it wasn't just Thornton. This runs higher than we imagined. And someone's been guiding him, empowering him, and the department's leadership allowed it to happen. The next day, the courthouse erupted with even more tension. Federal agents arrived with warrants, quietly coordinating the seizure of files, computers, and communications devices from implicated officers. Carter presided over these operations with methodical precision, issuing orders that balanced authority and legal protocol, ensuring the raids would be admissible in court. But the story wasn't just internal. The media, having caught wind of the massive federal involvement, descended on Briston in droves. News anchors spoke in hushed tones about systemic corruption, viral footage of a judge being assaulted, and the courage required to hold power accountable. Carter, however, refused interviews. He knew the story wasn't about him. It was about the victims, the accountability, and the systemic change that had to follow. In the midst of this chaos, a new twist arrived. An anonymous tip regarding Thornton's financial records. Carter examined the documents and discovered a network of undeclared funds, off-the-books bonuses, and unreported settlements that had flowed into accounts tied to Thornton and several of his collaborators. Elena, flipping through the spreadsheets, whispered, This could implicate at least 6 other officers and 2 supervisors. And the sums, Your Honor, they're huge." Carter's face darkened. "That's what we needed. It's one thing to abuse power in a courthouse. It's another to profit from it. Every dollar misappropriated is another victim. We'll pursue civil and criminal action. No loophole, no delay." By the end of the week, the ripple effects were unmistakable. Officers implicated in misconduct were suspended pending investigation. Public confidence in the Bristol Police Department, already fragile, began to fracture completely. Community activists, emboldened by Carter's unwavering stance, organized forums, town halls, and press conferences to demand systemic reform. And yet, a shadow remained. The anonymous email Carter had received hinted that Thornton had allies still in place, watching, waiting, perhaps planning to undermine the ongoing federal probes. Carter knew that complacency could allow retaliation. Every move had to be calculated, every contact verified. Trust was scarce, but vigilance would be his armor. Then came an unexpected visitor, Lydia Vale, a seasoned journalist who had covered local corruption for over 2 decades. She had been following the case closely, and her sources within the department had begun feeding her more than just stories. They had provided evidence. "Judge Reynolds," she said, leaning forward with a mixture of urgency and respect, "I've got documents, internal memos, and audio recordings that show even more officers were aware of Thornton's misconduct and did nothing. If these go public, the entire city council will be forced to act." Carter studied her carefully. "Lydia, I need everything secured under federal oversight. Nothing leaks until the right charges are filed. Justice isn't a spectacle. It's accountability." Her nod was sharp. "Understood, but be prepared. Once this hits, the backlash will be enormous. The department, the unions, they will fight." Carter exhaled slowly. Let them fight. The law isn't about comfort. It's about truth. That evening, as Carter reviewed case files late into the night, a pattern became chillingly clear. Thornton's misconduct had been the tip of a massive iceberg. Every case he touched, every file manipulated, and every complaint dismissed formed a web of corruption that had quietly strangled the community's trust for over a decade. Yet Carter remained resolute. "We start here," he murmured to himself, "and we follow every thread, every single one." Little did he know, the next twist was already in motion. An unexpected figure from Thornton's past, a former partner who had disappeared after a suspicious settlement years ago, was preparing to return, and this person carried information that could either solidify Carter's investigation or destabilize it completely. The battle for justice was far from over, and in the shadows of Bristol, power and corruption waited, calculating, ready to resist. But for the first time, someone capable, fearless, and relentless was prepared to strike back. The following morning, the Bristol courthouse was alive with tension, though outwardly calm. News crews lined the streets, their cameras capturing the stately facade of the building that had become a symbol of both abuse and accountability. Inside, Carter Reynolds moved with quiet purpose, robes flowing, gavel in hand, reviewing the latest intelligence files from the federal investigation. Elena Rhodes, sitting across from him at a polished oak table, tapped the tablet anxiously. "Judge, there's been activity. Several officers under investigation have started reaching out to contacts within the city council. They're trying to influence upcoming decisions, delay internal audits, maybe even push for Thornton's early appeal." Carter's eyes narrowed. Let them try. Every attempt to obstruct justice will be documented, every communication logged. The law moves slower than politics, but it doesn't stop. Just then, a knock at the door interrupted their discussion. The agent from the FBI Civil Rights Division, Agent Marcus Kane, entered briskly, carrying a thick manila folder. "Judge Reynolds, we've received verified intel on one of Thornton's former partners, someone who disappeared years ago but had direct involvement in several high-profile misconduct cases." Carter gestured for him to sit. "Go on." "The individual's name is Derek Callahan," Kane continued, voice low. "He was Thornton's partner in the narcotics task force 5 years ago. There are credible reports that he falsified reports, manipulated evidence, and received payments through shell accounts linked to several off-the-books department operations. Our sources indicate he has been living under an alias, but he's now resurfaced in Bristol, potentially aware of the ongoing investigation. Elena's eyes widened. If he's back, he could undo months of preparation. Carter leaned forward, his tone calm but resolute. Or he could provide us the final piece we need to dismantle the entire corrupt network. Kane, I want a secure surveillance team. We locate Callahan, we monitor every interaction, and we ensure that if he cooperates, it's under controlled federal conditions. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, reporters were swirling like bees drawn to honey. The viral footage of Carter Reynolds taking control of Thornton's trial had already circulated nationwide. Headlines screamed, "Federal judge takes down corrupt officer in historic courtroom showdown. Justice strikes back." The morning Bristol witnessed courage, and Judge Reynolds' reforms set new standard for police accountability. Local TV crews clamored for interviews. Citizens arrived in small groups, waving banners demanding systemic change. Some cheered Carter as a hero, others cautiously questioned how deep the corruption ran. Every corner of Bristol was buzzing with speculation and anticipation. Inside, Carter's team monitored media coverage closely. "We have to manage this carefully," Elena said. "The narrative must stay focused on justice and victims, not sensationalism. If Callahan surfaces, we need to be ready to frame the information responsibly." Carter nodded. "Exactly. Our goal is systemic accountability, not headlines. The world will watch, but the truth must lead." Days passed, and the surveillance team tracked Callahan to a discreet apartment complex near Bristol's riverfront. He was older than anticipated, mid-40s, with graying hair and the weary posture of someone who had spent years hiding. But he was careful, methodical, and observant, a predator in the shadows. Carter, accompanied by Kane and 2 federal agents, approached the situation with caution. Callahan's first reaction was shock. "Judge?" he stammered, eyes darting between the approaching team. "Derek Callahan," Carter said evenly. "You've been a shadow over this city for too long, but now you have a choice. You cooperate fully, and your testimony will help correct the injustices caused by you and your associates. Refuse, and you'll face federal charges for complicity in obstruction, falsifying evidence, and civil rights violations." Callahan hesitated. For the first time in years, he realized that the power structures he had relied on were no longer untouchable. Slowly, he nodded. "All right, I'll cooperate." The moment was pivotal. Through Callahan, Carter gained access to encrypted department communications, internal logs of misconduct, and corroborating evidence tying Thornton and his allies to dozens of wrongful arrests and falsified reports. Carter returned to the Bristol courthouse, prepared to confront the officers still resisting accountability. A hearing was scheduled for the remaining implicated personnel, including supervisors and officers who had knowingly participated in cover-ups. The courtroom was packed. Families of victims, journalists, and law enforcement personnel all watched as Carter meticulously presented Callahan's evidence. Audio recordings of officers discussing strategies to suppress complaints. Emails showing instructions to dismiss cases without proper review. Financial records revealing kickbacks and off-the-books bonuses. The tension was palpable. Some officers squirmed visibly, realizing there was no escape. Others tried to maintain a facade of confidence, but Carter's calm authority stripped their bravado away piece by piece. At one point, Carter paused dramatically and addressed the room. "Today, we are not punishing officers because they are police. We are holding them accountable because they violated the law and betrayed public trust. You swore an oath, just like I did, and for years some of you chose to ignore it. Gasps filled the room as documents were displayed on a large screen. Names, dates, and incriminating details became undeniable. Even the most defiant officers could not hide. Just as Carter thought the hearing was proceeding according to plan, a surprising revelation occurred. One of Thornton's old allies, Detective Harold Finch, who had been considered loyal and above reproach, suddenly took the stand and denied involvement. "Judge Reynolds," Finch said, voice tight, "I had no knowledge of Thornton's misconduct. None of this applies to me." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Detective Finch, we have records showing your signature on internal memos that explicitly instructed subordinates to close complaints without investigation. Your digital communications show discussions on fabricating evidence. Do you deny these?" Finch faltered, realizing that Carter had anticipated every possible defense. I. You will answer truthfully, detective, or perjury charges will follow," Carter said, gavel resting lightly on the bench, an unspoken reminder of authority. The courtroom went silent, the gravity of the situation pressing on every observer. The courtroom felt charged with electricity. Each breath weighted with anticipation. Carter Reynolds remained calm, his eyes scanning the gallery filled with journalists, victims' families, and officers who had thought themselves untouchable. Detective Harold Finch shifted uncomfortably in the witness chair, the evidence stacked against him leaving little room for maneuver. Carter adjusted his robes, letting the gavel rest lightly on the bench. The engraved phrase, "Justice is blind, but she sees all," catching the light. He addressed Finch directly. "Detective Finch, your digital communications show instructions to close complaints without review. Your emails to subordinates contain explicit orders to disregard allegations against certain officers. Your signature appears on multiple internal memos approving falsified reports. How do you respond?" Finch swallowed hard, realizing the gravity of his position. I was just following protocol. I didn't know it was illegal." Carter's voice sharpened. "Protocol does not excuse criminal behavior. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, detective. Every officer in this room was trained in legal procedures, internal investigations, and citizens' constitutional rights. You made choices. Those choices caused real harm. People were jailed. People were abused. Families destroyed. And for years, you hid behind the badge, thinking no one would notice." Before Finch could answer further, the doors to the courtroom opened abruptly. A young woman entered, moving with purposeful steps. She was Clara Benton, a former department clerk who had quietly documented internal misconduct for over 5 years. "Your Honor," Clara's voice rang clear and steady, "I have additional records that were never submitted to Internal Affairs. They detail a network of officers, including Finch and others, who knowingly falsified reports and suppressed complaints. I was threatened into silence, but I can no longer remain quiet." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Carter gestured for Clara to approach the bench. She handed over encrypted drives, spreadsheets, and printouts of emails, comprehensive evidence tying the officers to decades of abuse. Carter nodded at her. "Thank you, Clara. Your courage will ensure these officers face the consequences of their actions. Everyone in this room will now see exactly how deep the corruption runs." News of the courtroom revelations had already reached the city's mayor and council members. A coalition of community leaders, civil rights activists, neighborhood representatives, and former victims entered the courtroom quietly but with an unmistakable presence. Carter addressed them directly, his tone deliberate. These officers violated the public trust, but the system itself failed to hold them accountable. Today is a turning point. I am calling on each of you to collaborate on systemic reform. Citizen oversight boards, mandatory body cameras with automatic cloud backups, and independent reviews of all complaints. The community leaders nodded solemnly, understanding that justice was no longer symbolic, it was actionable. Back in the witness chair, Finch attempted a defense. Judge Reynolds, I wasn't the only one involved. Thornton, Callahan, there are others higher up. You're not seeing the whole picture. Carter's eyes narrowed. Exactly, and we will. That is why every communication, every record, every testimony is being collected and analyzed. You may have hidden behind the badge, but the truth has a memory far longer than your career. The courtroom gasped as Carter turned to display a large chart linking dozens of officers to patterns of misconduct, including timelines, affected victims, and internal cover-ups. Every lie, every falsified report, every dismissal without cause was mapped out. The visual evidence was undeniable. Carter addressed the courtroom. Effective immediately, this department is under federal oversight. All investigations of misconduct will be reviewed independently. Officers with prior complaints will undergo retraining and monitoring. Cases previously dismissed will be reopened. Those who covered up crimes will face charges. The community deserves accountability. Victims deserve restitution. And the city deserves transparency. Elena Rhodes whispered to Carter, "This is unprecedented. The department won't know what hit them." Carter replied quietly, "They already know. They just didn't believe anyone would have the courage to act." Outside the courthouse, the city erupted. Media coverage spread nationwide. Families of victims came forward to provide testimony. Advocates for reform seized momentum to push legislative change. Back in the courtroom, Detective Finch, Detective Callahan, and other implicated officers were taken into federal custody. Carter's team meticulously documented every step, ensuring no misstep could give them escape. The courtroom remained packed as Carter stood, gavel in hand. Let this serve as a warning to anyone who believes that power shields them from accountability. Justice is not optional, cannot be bought, cannot be ignored, and it will find you. The city was still reeling from the revelations at the courthouse. Carter Reynolds, now a national figure, had been summoned to testify before congressional committees about systemic abuse in law enforcement. News outlets ran continuous coverage, broadcasting clips of his courtroom victories and the digital evidence that exposed decades of corruption. Inside the newly renamed Reynolds Federal Courthouse, the air was charged with purpose. Citizens, victims, journalists, and reform advocates gathered for the first wave of reopened cases. Courtrooms were packed, some standing room only, as judges and prosecutors began the painstaking process of re-examining years of wrongful arrests, falsified reports, and ignored complaints. Carter walked into courtroom 3B, where a case involving a wrongfully imprisoned man, Darius King, was about to be retried. King had spent 7 years behind bars for a theft he did not commit, a conviction secured largely by falsified testimony from officers like Finch and Martinez. The courtroom buzzed as Carter presented evidence meticulously cataloged over months. He began with a timeline of King's arrest, juxtaposed against internal emails from the officers acknowledging inconsistencies in the investigation. Video footage showed the true sequence of events. The theft had occurred hours after King was documented elsewhere. King's attorney, Maya Stone, whispered to him, "You're going to be free today." Justice finally caught up. Carter nodded at King. Today, the system acknowledges its mistake. Today, you are no longer a statistic. You are a free man with your life restored. The judge presiding, Judge Leonard Graves, looked astonished as the evidence dismantled the prosecution's case. The charges were dismissed. King wept openly, tears of relief and disbelief streaming down his face. The courtroom erupted in applause, a wave of catharsis washing over everyone present. Across the city, similar proceedings unfolded. Carter's team worked tirelessly, cross-referencing years of internal affairs records, body cam footage, and citizen complaints. Each case told a story of systemic abuse. Tamara Wells, a teacher accused of assaulting a police officer, was exonerated when video evidence proved her innocence. Jamal Peterson, wrongfully jailed for a robbery he didn't commit, had his conviction overturned after emails showed Finch and his colleagues had intentionally ignored surveillance footage. Clara Benton, the whistleblower, provided testimony that led to multiple indictments for obstruction of justice. The pattern was clear. Decades of misconduct had been enabled by complacency and cover-ups. But for the first time, the system was being held accountable. Carter's influence began to extend beyond the courthouse. He was invited to speak at law schools, police academies, and community forums. His message was consistent. Power must be held accountable, and transparency is non-negotiable. In one speech at the City University Law School, Carter addressed a packed auditorium. "We cannot wait for another tragedy to expose corruption. We must create systems that prevent abuse before it happens. Every complaint must be investigated. Every officer must be accountable. Justice is not a concept, it is an action." Students and faculty alike were inspired, many dedicating themselves to careers in civil rights law, police oversight, and public advocacy. Not everyone welcomed reform. Certain factions within the police department attempted to intimidate witnesses, leak information, and discredit Carter. Anonymous threats were made against him and members of his team. Yet Reynolds remained undeterred. "Fear is a tool of the corrupt," he told his staff. "Our job is not to be popular, it is to be just. Courage is required when facing those who abuse power, and the truth will always outlast intimidation." By this point, the story of Carter Reynolds' courtroom triumphs and the systemic investigation had become a national headline. Civil rights organizations, community groups, and legislators used the Reynolds case as a blueprint for accountability. Federal oversight programs were expanded to other cities, ensuring similar misconduct could not persist unchecked. Every victim who had once been silenced was given a platform. Dozens appeared on news programs to recount their experiences, now supported by concrete evidence that vindicated their claims. While the majority of reopened cases led to justice, Carter and his team discovered several shocking surprises. Several officers not initially implicated were found to have actively destroyed evidence to protect colleagues. Some victims who had previously been acquitted were found to have been manipulated into pleading guilty due to intimidation tactics. Internal communications revealed a hidden culture of favoritism, where officers were rewarded for dismissing complaints rather than pursuing justice. These discoveries galvanized public opinion and accelerated reform efforts. Carter's meticulous approach ensured that no stone was left unturned. Carter knew that long-term change required more than prosecutions. He began designing a comprehensive justice reform initiative. 1. Mandatory independent review boards for all complaints against law enforcement. 2. Federal monitoring of departments with a history of misconduct. 3. Mandatory retraining programs on constitutional rights, bias, and de-escalation. 4. Automatic review of prior convictions linked to officers with a pattern of violations. 5. Transparent reporting of settlements, fines, and disciplinary actions. These policies would permanently change the justice system in the city, making accountability an institutional priority rather than an occasional intervention. The city buzzed with anticipation as Carter Reynolds prepared for what would be the final wave of reopened cases. Courtrooms were packed beyond capacity. Survivors of police abuse, family members of victims, journalists, and civic leaders filled every seat, gallery, and standing space. The courthouse, once a place associated with fear and intimidation, now radiated with purpose. Carter entered courtroom 1A, the largest courtroom in the courthouse. Today, he would confront Lieutenant Franklin Hayes, one of the senior officers whose misconduct had been carefully hidden for years. Hayes had spent 20 years cultivating a network of loyal officers, suppressing complaints, and maintaining the illusion of perfection. Hayes arrived with his attorney, confident and unshaken. But confidence quickly evaporated as Carter laid out the evidence. Internal emails revealing orders to dismiss frivolous complaints quickly and protect Martinez at all costs. Video footage showing officers tampering with evidence in multiple cases. Testimonies from whistleblowers within the department corroborating systemic abuse. The courtroom fell silent as Carter presented case after case, highlighting how Hayes' leadership enabled Martinez and others to violate rights repeatedly without consequence. The evidence was irrefutable. Hayes' attorney attempted to object, but Judge Graves intervened sharply. "Counsel, the evidence speaks for itself. Objections will not silence the truth." Hayes' face drained of color. For the first time, he looked powerless, stripped of the authority he had wielded for decades. One by one, victims were called to testify. Their voices, once ignored, now commanded attention. Darius King spoke about losing his teenage years to a wrongful conviction, how it shaped his life, and how Carter's work had restored his freedom. Tamara Wells recounted the humiliation and trauma of being falsely accused, her confidence shaken, her livelihood threatened. Clara Benton, the whistleblower, described the fear she faced reporting misconduct and the courage it took to come forward. Each testimony reinforced a single truth. The system had failed for years, but it was now being held accountable. The audience, journalists, and even hesitant court staff were visibly moved, some shedding tears. Carter approached the bench, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom, landing on Hayes. He spoke with calm authority, each word deliberate. "Lieutenant Hayes, you built a career on fear and deception. You protected the guilty and silenced the innocent. But today, your network of lies has collapsed. The victims you ignored, the complaints you dismissed, and the abuses you condoned will finally be acknowledged. Justice does not forget. Justice does not compromise. And today, justice is here." He turned to address the court as a whole. "To everyone watching, to everyone who has ever been silenced, harassed, or harmed by the misuse of authority, this is your victory. Your courage to stand, to report, to fight, has culminated in a system that now prioritizes accountability over concealment. Let today mark the moment when power was finally held accountable." Hayes, Martinez, and other implicated officers faced immediate federal charges. Each conviction sent shockwaves through the police department. Sentences ranged from 10 to 25 years for officers directly responsible for civil rights violations and assault. The city immediately implemented Carter's reform measures. 1. Independent oversight boards were fully operational, reviewing complaints without internal bias. 2. Federal monitoring of the police department ensured continued compliance and transparency. 3. Mandatory retraining programs began for all officers, focusing on civil rights, implicit bias, and de-escalation tactics. 4. Reopened cases continued to free wrongfully imprisoned individuals, with settlements restoring lives financially and emotionally. The media hailed the reforms as a national blueprint for accountability in law enforcement. Other cities began implementing similar systems, inspired by the comprehensive changes Carter had orchestrated. Months later, Carter stood outside the Justice Reynolds Federal Courthouse, reflecting on the journey. He looked at the plaque commemorating the morning that changed everything. Justice finally found its voice. Children, families, and community members approached, expressing gratitude for restoring faith in the system. Law students and young lawyers sought mentorship, inspired to pursue careers in civil rights advocacy. Carter thought of every individual whose voice had been silenced for years and how each had contributed to this monumental shift. "This," he whispered, "is what justice looks like when courage meets accountability." The courthouse, once a symbol of fear, now represented hope, vigilance, and fairness. Carter knew challenges would continue, as systems always require constant scrutiny. But for the first time, the community could see that reform was possible, that power could be challenged, and that the law could serve its true purpose. Officer Martinez remained incarcerated, serving his 25-year sentence. Lieutenant Hayes and several other officers faced lengthy prison terms and permanent dismissal from law enforcement. Victims finally received justice and financial restitution, enabling them to rebuild lives interrupted by systemic abuse. The city adopted permanent measures to prevent future misconduct, including transparency initiatives and mandatory federal audits. Carter Reynolds continued to oversee reforms, mentor young attorneys, and advocate for civil rights nationwide. The ripple effects extended beyond the city. The story of courage, accountability, and relentless pursuit of justice became a global example of how one determined individual could catalyze systemic change. And in the courthouse, as the sun set, the Justice Reynolds Federal Courthouse stood tall, a symbol that justice, no matter how delayed, could never be denied.